chance to mention 3 different issues or priorities. And you can see right at the top, again, reflecting the problems that they identified, reducing the cost of living, overwhelmingly mentioned. And again, it's mentioned by people across the political divide as captured in these coalitions, or even those who don't identify with any coalition, just over 70%. No political difference there whatsoever. The next mention, remember people could give 3, was job creation. Again, hardly any difference across the political divide, around 50% for both coalitions and overall. Then comes dealing with problems in the education system, which are basically 2 that were mentioned. The adoption, the integration of the competence-based curriculum and the junior secondaries, and then other issues. Public debt, reducing spending, and then security issues, agriculture, and so on. And again, this will tell you, it will help, I think, focus all of our minds on the debate that's going on in the context of these Azimio demonstrations, because being out of power, the Azimio leaders can make statements and they can energize their people to go on the streets to complain, but they can't really implement policies. They can demand that the prices of basic goods that come down, but they do not control Treasury. They do not control other aspects of the economy that the government can at least influence. So it's a battle in a way between words and deeds. Can the government do enough to address these problems so that the motivation, at least the economic motivation, I know there are other complaints or demands that Azimio is making, and I haven't seen too many of you people on the street during the demonstrations interviewing people and asking them, what's the main reason you're on the street? I've seen a little bit, these live interviews, but it would be good to find out. To what extent is it political? To what extent is it economic? But of course, the only way scientifically you can find out is by doing a survey. Hey, latecomers. Watakosa utama. Any question about this? No? But again, the main point here is across the political division as captured in support for the coalitions, there's really no difference in what people would like the government to do. And I must say, as a citizen of the United States, this is completely different from my country. Republicans, the main thing they would want the government to do is to lower taxes so people who are wealthier can keep more of their money and not have it go to the government. More Democrats, supporters of President Biden, will say, we want more government programs to deal with the less fortunate in society. Spend more on medical insurance. Spend more on retirement insurance. After the shootings in the school in Tennessee yesterday, many more Democrats would say, our priority is to restrict the sale of high-powered weapons. And most Republicans, not all, most Republicans believe people should be able to own whatever weapons they want. So we have very, very clear divisions in certain political systems on what they want government to do. But in Kenya, no. It's basically the same. And this also tells you, if you want to go back and think about the campaigns last year, why so often the campaign teams from Kenya Kwanza and Azimio were campaigning in the same areas, because they know across the country most Kenyans have similar problems. Not entirely, but to a great extent. Okay, finally, we asked people to identify who they thought so far was the best performing cabinet secretary. And we know that in reading off a list of all of them, many people would not be familiar with them, or if you ask them, if you just read off the ministries and ask them, who is the CS? Many of them are not yet known. The ones that are best known so far are the ones, of course, because of you people, have been in the news. And you know very well the 2 or 3 who have been in the news the most. Give me the names. Who? Professor Kindiki, number 1 in Interior. Who's another person whose name has been in the news? A CS? Yes, Linturi, very much, with the fertilizer and so on. Who else? Machogo, very good. Because these people are in the news. And therefore, when we got the ratings of who's performing best, we got them in exactly, or almost exactly that way. Professor Kindiki, highest rating. Of course, Murabadi, the question was cabinet officials, not just secretaries, sorry. So the prime cabinet secretary comes right after the education secretary, CS, Ezekiel Muchogo, followed by Ababu Namamba in youth and sports, and then Aiden Duale in defense, Moses Curry in trade, Elliot Awalo information, and then Kipchumba Murkomen in roads and transport. To what extent these names were mentioned just because people are more familiar with them? We didn't ask them, why do you say they're best performing? We didn't get into that level of detail. And I suspect, based both on performance and on increasing familiarity, because many of the cabinet secretaries and senior cabinet officials have never held these senior positions before. Now, we do have the CS in Treasury, Bonandungu. He was, I think, governor of the central bank before. So he's not a complete newcomer. He was working in the Kibaki government. So some of these people are reappearing in their senior positions. But many of them are new. So we'll see also how this evolves over time. And again, this gives more of a breakdown across the political divide. Where again, you can see this distribution. I don't think we did the color scheme on this one. If you want to change the bars to make it easier to read. The blue for the Azimio and for the Kenya Kwanza, and the yellow for. So that's just a little more detail on those. Let me just, before I ask for your questions, just conclude by saying that the political debate in Kenya is definitely being driven by economic issues. And we know, whatever our political leanings, that the economic situation that the government is dealing with, and this is also true at the county level, has largely been inherited from the previous government. Most often mentioned is the high level of public debt and the desperate, very active attempts by this government to find revenue to pay down that debt so that much less money would have to be used to pay interest on these loans. Power just went off? Nice that we just finished. But there are a couple other aspects of the economic situation, which have also been mentioned, that came from the previous government, which I don't think, in my personal opinion, I don't usually give my personal opinion, but I'll give it now, I don't think we can really blame the previous government for. First was the COVID pandemic and the impact that had on the economy. My personal opinion is that the Uhuru Kenyatta-led government did a better job in dealing with the COVID pandemic than did the leaders of many other countries. Certainly did a better job than, in my view, than President Donald Trump. Certainly did a better job than Bolsonaro in Brazil. I think, may he rest in peace, Uhuru did a much better job with COVID than President Magufuli in Tanzania. There was a great deal of attention to science, and the Ministry of Health and related ministries were empowered. But that doesn't mean it didn't have a big impact on the Kenyan economy, including a huge depression in international tourism. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Second inherited issue from the previous government, of course, was actually the third. First one was debt. You can blame that on the government. Corona was not a fault of the government. I think they did pretty well. And maybe the major one that's continuing is the war in Ukraine, which, as you know, has had such a big impact on inflation, especially for grain and petroleum products. And this inflation and global shortages because of the war in Ukraine is also one of the main factors, if not the main factor, on the very steep and continuing decline in the value of the Kenyan shilling that we've seen over the last, well, year, but especially the last 4, 5, 6 months since this government has come in. And because so many of the things that Kenya needs, starting with petroleum, have to be paid for, and grain, have to be paid for in US dollars, until maybe someday the Chinese yuan replaces the dollar as the global currency, that also has a big impact on the cost of living. So yes, we've seen Azimio blaming the government for removing certain subsidies, and we also have a big debate about the energy sector with the new cost increases, I think, supposed to come in next month. I'm waiting to see how much my own bill is going to go up. But there's as I'm saying, there's a combination of factors that are affecting the state of the Kenyan economy and its direct impact on Kenyans. And each one of these factors could be evaluated differently in terms of how much the current government can actually influence it, whatever the factor is we're talking about. Some things are much more under its control than others, some of which are completely outside its control. And in any country, resources are limited. You've probably seen the demonstrations taking place in Germany yesterday, even when President Ruto was there, massive strike. There have been strikes in the UK. Now, all of the demonstrations and strikes in France are related to the president's attempt to increase the age of retirement by 2 years, from 62 to 64, because he says, without delaying the year or the age by which people retire, the government will be bankrupt. It won't be able to pay pensions. But it seems French people don't want to look at the mathematics of that. I haven't looked at the actual proposal. I think it would be very unfair to tell somebody who is 61 in France, who's been planning to retire next year, oh no, you have to work another 3 years. I hope the proposal says something like, well, if you're over 50, you can still retire when you're 62 because you're old, or getting old and you've been planning. But ukiwa bara kijana, you'll have to work till 64. I don't know exactly how that bill has been drafted. I've been too busy to look at it. Anyway, all I'm saying that these kinds of problems that we're having in Kenya are not unique to us. And in a democracy, it is a contest, a political contest, even when the next election is not very close. It's a contest, whether it's in France, whether it's in Germany, whether it's in England or Kenya, to win over people's support for the argument that you are making. And that's what we see happening in all of these countries at the moment. Which also, to just conclude, is another reason why I think surveys such as this one that we at TIFA have just done are very important, both for leaders and citizens, so they can see, you know, it's very easy for a small group of people to cause a lot of trouble. When I was teaching at the university, if I had 3 or 4 students who were complaining about my teaching methods, they could go to the head of our department and cause trouble. But the other 40 or 50 or 60 students in the class who were happy with the way I was teaching, they kept quiet. So in fact, once our chairman had to come to my class and do a survey right in front of me. How many of you are happy with Dr. Wolf's teaching? That was my great friend, Professor Walter Oyugi. So he did a survey right there. But in public space, people who make the most noise are the ones who are often heard. But that can be misleading. And that's why we think these surveys are very important. The last thing I'll say is, and I've given this example before, one of the reasons that Emperor Haile Selassie was overthrown in Ethiopia during the famine of 1974 and later executed was that he had no idea how many people in that country were dying of starvation. There were no surveys. His intelligence people were afraid to tell him because he was the emperor sent by the Almighty and they didn't want to offend him. So when all of these tens of thousands of people marched on his palace in Addis, it came as a surprise to him. No leader who wants to be successful, and the basic criterion of being successful is to stay in power and win your next election if you're allowed to have one. You want to pay close attention to what your citizens are experiencing. And in addition to government intelligence and whatever confidential surveys the government may be doing, or even the opposition may be doing, we think we're also playing our part in making these realities clear, not just to the leaders, but also to ordinary Kenyans. So thank you very much for your attention. If we have any questions, please feel free to ask. But as I say, don't ask such a tough question that I can't answer. Yes, sir. And just tell me where you're from before you ask your question.
My name is Omar from
West TV, thank you.
My question is about, you just talked about removal of the subsidies. Do you think, as a researcher, if the subsidies can be brought back on some of the goods of the petroleum and other commodities, will it be any better?
When you say be any better, do you think there would be more support for the government?
No, on the livelihood, the economic impact on the Kenyans.
Well, what I see that you people are reporting in the news, this is one of the main requests that I see people on the street making, whether they've been involved in the protests or not. I don't have the facts, but if we just took those respondents who said that somebody in their household, whether them or somebody else, always or often goes to sleep hungry, if we correlated that with what they felt was the main problem facing people in their area, I bet you 50 shillings, that 90% of them at least would say cost of living is the main problem for them. Or hunger or drought, especially if they're northern Kenya or lower eastern. So I don't think the question really, I mean, thank you for your question, it's a good one, but I think the question, the more difficult question is, what is it that makes it difficult for the government to bring those subsidies back? Because it's clear that would alleviate the suffering of many people. And I think you have to ask people in government, before you would bring back these subsidies that we have before, what would have to happen? Where would the money come from? Where could we find it? We also know that the Kenya government, like many governments, especially in developing countries, need to get loans from the IMF and so on, and they sometimes impose conditions. Like cost sharing in universities came up 20 years ago, I think, as an IMF condition. That was after I'd left campus, but still. So it's good to ask people who are in positions of authority, what would have to happen, what would you need to have in terms of resources before you could bring back these subsidies, and at what level do you think they should be? Because if the subsidies are too high, then you encourage inefficient production. So, and because of the regional competitive market, especially in agriculture, and global through the WTO, you have to make sure that your costs of production are not so high. That's one of the main complaints that have been made about electricity in Kenya, that its per unit cost is higher than in Uganda and Tanzania, which undermines the competitiveness of the goods that are produced by factories that use electricity. So it's a very important question. I certainly cannot speak on behalf of government Any other good question like that one? Yes, just tell me where you're from.
Hi, sir. Good afternoon. My name is Orina Kalai from UNCTV.
From where?
UNCTV, University of Nairobi, Channel TV.
I didn't hear you. She's from where?
University of Nairobi.
The University?
Of Nairobi.
I see. Which department?
University of Nairobi TV.
Pardon?
TV.
TV. I didn't know the university had a TV station now. Hongera.
We have.
I wish you had it in my days. Good. Ask your question.
I want to pass up a state what you're doing at TIFA. This is research in fundamentally.
Right, let me hear you better. Go ahead. Speak in the microphone.
I was saying, I love what TIFA is doing because this is research is fundamentally important and informing and strategic to determine the future. A short question for you was that if you happened to meet President Ruto for 5 minutes, what are some of the priority things you'll be able to tell them in 5 minutes, for sure?
Mine? I don't think anyone has ever asked me before a question like that. No, I would ask him, Mheshimiwa Rais, umeona tokeo yetu ya juzi na ulionaje? I'd ask him if he's seen it and what he thought of it. Now, my guess is he's probably too busy every time a survey comes out to go through the whole thing, but I would hope that some of his advisors would pay attention to this and give him at least like a 2-page summary so he could quickly read it when he's on an airplane or something like that. So my main question would be, I guess, no, the other question I would ask, Mr. President, do you think these surveys are helpful to your government in any way in making the difficult decisions it has to make from day to day? And I would have asked that to the former president or the president before that. I mean, any. I would ask the same question if I met President Biden. How much do public surveys assist you in making difficult decisions about what policies to support and how much energy to back them? Because there's no use in supporting a policy if you know you can't get enough votes for it in your legislative branch. But I'm very interested to know in what use politicians make of these surveys, even before elections in their campaigns. But that's a very interesting question. I'm happy to see people from the University of Nairobi. Para wako na akili ya kutosha. Any other question? Yes, please. Organized? Not organized. Recognized. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, thank you for asking that question. As I said when I was presenting those results, when these lists of the cabinet secretaries were read out, many respondents, I don't remember the exact figure, said, Simjui. Bado sijajua kazi yake. So their work hasn't been recognized yet because they've only been in their positions for half a year. So the data that we extracted is for those who were rated by those respondents who could give any rating of any of them, even 1 or 2. So, and that's why if you look at the, oh, do we have it there? Let me just show you. I told you that in this survey we had 2,065 respondents. But for this chart, there were only 1,713 because the other 300 or so, hawana habari yoyote, they did not know even a single cabinet secretary. Sijui wanashindana na njaa ama nini, kukamua ng'ombe, nini shughuli zao za kikawaida, nini. So that's why we had to put in that qualifier, recognized, because not everybody could recognize or identify even one. But thank you very much for that question to help clarify that. As I said earlier, as we move forward over the next year or so on, without any doubt, more of these secretaries and their work will become known, and that will give our respondents a better msingi for judging how they are performing. Good question. Another one. Uh-oh.
Well, I look at.
Sorry, you're from where?
My name is Walter.
Yes.
My name is Walter Mbaga from Govt area. I keenly look at your importance to be very specific. The part that you indicate that how more often that the people would likely to go without food, and in your specification you indicate political alignment. So at what point did you conclude?
Sorry, is that question about sleeping hungry?
Yeah.
Okay, let me get back to that 1 second. So we know
Okay,
what we're
then.
talking about. Yes, this one?
Manual, page 10, think so.
Yes,
Great.
here we are.
At what point did you conclude that your specific why supports Kenya Kwanza?
Say that again. At what point did we conclude what?
That the person you asking the question or your specimen why
Yes.
is as a real supporter of Kenya Kwanza.
So as I said, elsewhere in the survey, separate from these questions on the economy, we asked people their education level, we asked if they were married or not, their marital status, their hali ajira nini, and then we also asked them if there's any political coalition you support, which one is that? So each one of these 2,065 respondents, we could valisha them with a falana, with a jersey, so we know whether they are Kenya Kwanza supporters or Azimio supporters, or they don't support any. And that allows us to do a correlation calculation so that we can show you for these three groupings as well as total how people answered certain questions. Is that explain it?
Now, very last one. What was TIFA aiming to achieve by having the report in political alignment in Kwanza and Azimio in the report?
Oh my goodness. I don't know. Where unishi wapi bwana? Where do you live? Do you not see that Azimio leadership is even refusing to recognize the Kenya Kwanza government as legitimately elected? I mean, there's a big debate out there. Ulikuwa wapi jana? Did you not see some mandamanos and tear gas and whatever? I mean, even when there is not such disturbances in public spaces, in any democracy, there is going to be a difference of opinion over certain issues. That's what we celebrate about democracy, the freedom to disagree within the Constitution, within the law. So, given the fact that this is the main division within the country, we also ask people, which political party, if any, do you support? But we know that the different parties came together, so many of them, in coalitions for the last election, even in terms of the registrar of political parties, Ms. Nduritu. So we wanted to show over which issues and situations is there a difference in terms of people's political alignment, and where is there not? Now, if you remember from the release that we gave the previous Friday, we found that 56%, and this was mentioned in the media, of those who support Azimio, identify with Azimio, also were supporting the planned mandamanos. On the Kenya Kwanza side, I think it was only 14 or 15% who supported them. Why? They were supporting the president's party, coalition, and they're supporting mandamanos. Also, maybe they're also sleeping hungry. Pay me some money and I'll do you a special analysis to tell you who are those people who support Kenya Kwanza who are also supporting Mandamano. Why? And yet Mandamano is led by Azimio. Who are they? What are they suffering from? What are their priorities? But you have to give me a little extra money so Michael here can do the analysis for you with the data. So, as I say, on a question like that, you could see a huge difference between supporters of the two coalitions. But on something like this, there's almost none. So we think that that helps people to understand what's the situation in the country that leaders and citizens have to deal with. If you can think of a better way of analyzing the data, but that's a very, very appropriate and useful question. Any others? Or we've kept you long enough. You want to rush back to your newsroom? Let me give you my phone number. If you're doing a story and you want some quick clarification,